Now, what if we want our ChatGPT to respond in the style of Shakespeare? And this is something we discussed about in the previous video. So every prompt says that it has to be in the style of Shakespeare, and every response is going to be in that style. So for that, the first topic we're going to be looking at is prompt template. And prompt template can be imagined as something that is something that acts like a socket, and this socket takes the user input and combines that together before it sends to the large language model. So in this case here, we have the template that takes user input and combines that together and sends as a single prompt to the large language model as right in the style of Shakespeare, how to cook pasta. And once this prompt is together, then we can now call the large language model and get the response back as the rest of the flow that we have seen. So to use this, we're going to go to our flows. Now at this time, we're going to build something new in Flowise. So let's start with a simple large language model chain. And this is available under the chain section. And if you look at the description, it says chain to run queries against large language model, which is simple. So, and this is something that we need. We don't necessarily need a conversation or chat-based model, so we could have used the conversation chain in that case. But for now, we just want to keep it simple and use a large language model chain. And we see that this particular chain needs a large language model and a prompt, so we will supply that. And even in this case, we can either supply a LLM from OpenAI, or we could supply the chat model. Let's go with the OpenAI LLM just for a change. So in this case, again, I'm going to connect the OpenAI connector with the language model, and then it needs a prompt. So that's what we're going to be doing. We will take the prompt template. So now there is a chat prompt template and a prompt template. We'll start with prompt template. Now you'll notice that prompt template, so let's first connect this. So it has some description available here to help you out, and then it also has option to format prompt values. Now, as we discussed, we want to keep it simple, and we will just say write in the style of Shakespeare. So I just gave it a prompt, write in the style of Shakespeare. And the way we can take user input in Flowise and LangFlow is that we can start and close with curly braces and just type in any input variable. So right now I'm going to say user input. And what's going to happen is it will take this from the prompt or the user input that we give it. So this takes care of the base prompt, the template that we're providing, and then it also takes the user input. And then when it sends to the large language model, it's going to send as one sentence as we saw here in our previous slides. Okay, so let's give it a try. The only thing missing right now is the OpenAI API keys. So I will quickly add that. And now with that, we can leave rest of the model name and temperature settings as is. And let's try if that works. So first thing, it asks for a chat flow name. So I'll give it LM call. And then let's try. So I'm going to ask how to go pasta. So if everything goes fine, it should take this input, and along with the initial prompt template, it should send that over to the OpenAI model. Let's see. Okay, so it wrote something which is fine, but I don't necessarily see it a lot in the style of Shakespeare. So this is where we can test with different models. So OpenAI provides multiple models, and Text DaVinci 3, there are a few of those that you can explore, but it is known that the chat-based models are quite nice and they follow instructions quite well compared to the Text DaVinci models. And it is highly recommended to read a little bit about different models and what they do. So I'm gonna remove this block. I add a chat model here, and I will use chat OpenAI block. And the next step is to add the OpenAI API key, which I'll add here. Let's see how this differs to the previous question we asked. So I am going to take the same question and ask that here again. Okay, I missed to connect it, so let's connect it here. I'm going to save it and let's give it a try again. All right, so now I can see that it has a lot more of a poetic style compared to what we saw before. So, yeah, it gave quite a long response and it uses, or at least tries to use, Shakespeare based written English style. So, we see that how using different large language models can affect our response that we get from these models. And not just that, we also see that how we can now prompt and take these templates and combine that with user input and get some feedback. Now, this is something that could also be utilized for different business cases. So, for example, if you were to have a website or an app that allows for people to chat with famous personalities. So maybe one could change this input and one could say, so what I've done is I have given a prompt template that you are Steve Jobs. Your task is to reply back to the user input as Steve Jobs would respond. Please respond to the following. So you can imagine this could be changed to any prompt and any famous personality. And this could be a business idea, business concept where you can allow users to chat with famous personalities and get a response back. So let's test this out. I am going to save it and I'll also save the flow and then let's give it a try. Now, this time I'm going to ask a question that most likely Steve Jobs would answer. So I'm going to ask how to start a business. Let's see. Now it takes the prompt and combines that with the prompt template, and then it responds back in Steve Jobs style. And it also says stay focused, stay hungry, similar to the style of Steve Jobs. So these are some of the few examples that we could utilize prompt templates. Now, of course, there are many examples that you can use for the prompt template. And I just came across a website, FlowGPT, that uses prompts. There are many different websites that you can find prompts and benefit from those. So, for example, if I were to search as mentor and I were to click on one of these provided example, so they do have the prompt that you can look at, and you can take any of these prompts and use it in your application. And the response from the OpenAI models is going to be along those lines. So, prompt engineering in general is quite an interesting field. There is a lot that could be gained from these prompts, and you can literally build multiple applications based on just these prompt templates and let users provide their input, and the response is going to be based on the templates that you have provided. So, with that, one last thing, just wanted to mention in case you were wondering, what are the parameters here? So, two things that you might be benefiting and using a lot in your chat OpenAI blog or in the large language blog. So, just for example, let's open the OpenAI blog. So, One is the model name. This is something that we can test. The latest models are most likely going to have advantage over the previous models. So GPT-4 currently is known to have some of the best performance for code-related questions as well as many different types of questions. Now, it's not necessarily cost effective, but GPT 3.5 family is cost effective and you can utilize in your application. So that's one. And second is the temperature. Temperature is a parameter that tells the model how creative it needs to be. So if you were to keep it all the way down close to zero, then it's going to be the least creative. And if you go up to the max setting, and this is something you might want to check with each model that will use that, what is the max setting? And if you go to that extent, then it will generate responses with a creative setting. Now, if you were to look in the additional parameters, you will notice that there are different settings as well. And some of these are going to be used by us a few times, and some of those are not necessarily needed as much. So something we might use is max tokens. These are the max number of tokens allowed by a given model. And tokens are a way to calculate the number of words. And every model does the breakdown of words in different ways. So, for example, there is a nice article written by Zapier where you can get an understanding how GPT-3 and the token system works. So, in here, there is color coding, and you can see that the breakdown of tokens sometimes is between the words, sometimes it involves the complete word. So, now in this case, these are 56 tokens, and it could be varying number based on your prompt and also the language you are using. So now in our case, we can change the setting. We can make this go up to the max allowed tokens and then run accordingly. So we are going to change this a few times. Now, some of the other ones, top probability, frequency penalty, presence penalty, you could change this, but some of these, if you're changing temperature, you might not necessarily need to play around with the probability, or many a times you'll see changing either or. Similarly, in frequency and presence penalty, I would suggest to give it a read and tweak it accordingly in case if you're not able to get the right results. Now, on this topic, there's a nice article written by Twilio that guides you through frequency and presence penalties and what that means. Sometimes you might benefit from increasing these values, so it makes sure that the frequency of a given word or the presence of a certain word is penalized by reducing that amount of frequency or presence of a given word or sentence. So it reduces the chances of having repetition of the words or sentences. Now, this is the case for FlowWise. If we were to look at LangFlow, we see similar possibilities where I am going to bring an LangChain block and then combine that with Chat OpenAI and then the prompt template. So in here, you can look at prompt section and then you have prompt template as well as zero shot prompt. We're going to use prompt template, and the way you can change that is by clicking on this expansion button, and then you see that there is a base prompt that was provided as default. One could change this, and then based on that, you can get a response. The base prompt also contains history, so I am going to take that out, and everything over here looks fine. So I am going to say that this is a conversation between human and Steve Jobs, or not human and Steve Jobs, but probably user and Steve Jobs, and I'm going to change all of these as Steve Jobs. So the current conversation, I'll take that out. And then the only input that we need is this text. So everything else looks fine. I'll check and save. Now, the parameter that we need to ensure that we're supplying is the text, because in LangFlow, it uses the values that you provide from the LLM chain, and it can be called in our prompt. And also, if you have some other blocks, then you can look at the available input parameters if there are any, and then use that in your prompt template. So in this case, everything looks fine. I am just going to add the API keys. Okay, so that's added and the prompt looks good. Let's give it a try. First, save it and run the flow. Everything is green. It's happy. And then perhaps ask the same question we asked in Flowwise, which is how to start a business. Now, again, if everything goes fine, it's gonna try to mimic the style of Steve Jobs and respond back as Steve Jobs. Okay, so just to showcase, this is how we can start with prompt templates and combine the user input with the template that we have available and send the complete prompt to the large language model. And then we get a response back from these large language models.